And welcome to The Bottom Line, where we break down the most pressing business and economic stories of the day. The UK is Poland's fourth largest export market, and this contributes to a thriving Anglo-Polish trade relationship. But it disguises the practical experience of trade between the two countries. Here with me to unpack what's really happening en route between the UK and Poland is Marek Schejbal from Green Sea Group International Food Consultancy. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the Anglo-Polish trade relationship is thriving post-Brexit, or so it seems. Has this relationship somehow managed to foolproof itself? And if so, how?
Thriving in terms of statistics, yes. From a food perspective, if we look at sort of the increase of exports from the UK, largely that's driven by whiskey, which actually is over 25% of all British food exports worldwide. And that has seen certain growth. From the Polish side, it's driven mainly by the meat sector, poultry, particularly as Poland is sort of the largest producer and exporter of poultry in Europe. So the statistics show that, but the underlying side is driven mainly by larger businesses, larger companies that can actually take full trucks, full containers into each market, and particularly from the UK, where as soon as the EU barriers were introduced, then all sort of groupage stopped. And groupage basically means a truck taking more than pallets from more than one supplier, which meant paperwork with each different product, with each different supplier, and that stopped because transport companies stopped doing that.
So perhaps you could just break it down for our viewers, that experience of trade between the two countries for a large company and perhaps for SMEs, just on a practical level. What does that look like?
Large companies basically, because of the volume of business they do, can actually ship full trucks or full containers of product from one supplier to one buyer, which means one lot of paperwork with that transport. If you're a smaller company and you haven't got those sort of volumes, you have to actually share that transport. And transport companies don't want to risk that, because if paperwork from one company is incorrect, it stops the entire transport. And that is actually what was happening, particularly post-Brexit with transport from UK to EU. Trucks were just being turned around because of paperwork issues. And that paperwork is a major problem still today, which means that a lot of the business is left to bigger players that can actually move sort of significant volumes.
Okay, so I've heard that there's a bit of an issue with British cheddar cheese here in Poland, and perhaps Irish cheddar is actually pushing out British cheddar. Can you tell us a little bit about
Very
that?
sadly. I introduced basically Cathedral City, which is the #1 cheddar brand, to the Polish market 10 years ago, and we had really good growth in sales. Now, Cathedral City is practically non-existent, and that is also due to those same reasons, that the bigger volume players can actually deliver full trucks somewhere into Europe, France, Holland, and then smaller buyers can buy pallets off them. But it still is down to the bigger players who actually have got those routes set up and all the paperwork with that. If you're a smaller player, which is actually most of the UK cheese industry, that has actually just fallen by the wayside.
So what about solutions? What kind of solutions can be considered by UK exporters when it comes to the EU to mitigate all these problems?
Well, the bigger players have already found those solutions. Also work with the British meat industry. And the biggest exporters do deliver full trucks somewhere into Europe, and then they have customers picking up smaller amounts, basically pallet loads. Others have actually then established themselves in Ireland, for example, so they can actually export within the EU, but then that comes with transport costs. Contract manufacturing is another one, moving your production into Europe for the European business. And we've run projects like that. And in fact, that is an interesting model because it's scalable. So if you can actually produce somewhere in Europe, and Poland's a very good base, you can then build a business sort of not only in Europe, but beyond.
And is that actually happening?
That is happening. We've got projects running where we'll be building or developing halal products here in Poland.
Is there a demand for that?
Not in Poland, but Europe there is. UAE and other Islamic markets. And as long as the whole production is certified, which we'll have it certified, then there's a real opportunity for being part of actually a really growing market worldwide.
Very interesting. I wanted to ask you about the UK border target operating model, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's actually quite crucial for UK exporters and also, I suppose, in some way for European importers. So just for our viewers, it's this legislation, I suppose, essentially bureaucracy that has been implemented in phases. The last phase is being implemented in October. Tell us about that. Do you think it's actually going to make things more efficient? Is it going to streamline things? That's obviously the way the UK government is presenting it.
To be perfectly honest, I think it's going to hit Polish exporters to UK more than the other way around. British exporters have been used to these restrictions right from day one, and they have been severe. The UK has been implementing them for imports into the UK, periodically. And these phases that are coming in now will actually make it more difficult. There will be more bureaucracy, and it will very sadly affect smaller exporters once again.
But there are suggestions that for those traders that are regular traders on the European UK route, that they might get special treatment because they will be recognizable, shall we say, in terms of the sourcing for the UK.
Well, the special treatment, it really does come down to the practical side of actually implementing that. We've seen that the implementation so far has been very mixed. So there's been a lot of miscommunication in terms of processes being put in place post-Brexit. So this is yet another one, and the proof will be in the pudding, so to speak.
And I suppose my last question to you is, just now that Brexit has been in place for a good few years, Brexit was supposed to be a new chapter for the UK. It was supposed to be a new era of trade relations, free of EU restrictions, I suppose. Do you think that now this is backfiring for the UK?
Well, it's backfiring at the moment because the trade agreements with other regions are not in place. So some are in negotiations, some have been put in place. You can't suddenly replace your biggest trading partner overnight, and it will take absolute years. Actually, the trade with the EU isn't that bad right now. I mean, it has tailed off a bit, but it's not, I think it's not as disastrous as the UK would have thought it could be.
I suppose one last question that we can squeeze in is that of beer. How's that looking in terms of trade between Poland and the UK?
British beer was on Polish shelves always, and after Brexit it disappeared. And likewise, it comes down to volumes, it comes down to all those issues of paperwork and trucks and transport. We actually brewed the first British ales in Poland under original recipes a couple of years ago, and that is also a way of working around, in other words, contract production here. So it's not easy to do with beers. We also bottled whiskey as well, trying to work around some of these issues. So it is doable, but it would be great to see British beers on the shelves again, but that means working through different delivery models.
Do you think that can be recovered in the years to come?
I'm sure it will be, but we now have to sort of recreate demand, and that is the difficulty, because once you've actually disappeared from a market for a number of years, you have to come in with a lot of funds to rebuild that demand. And the same is absolutely with British dairy. We've actually lost that. The Irish have come in, and now to regain that, it will require investment. Okay,
Marek, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you very much for joining us on.
Thank you very much.
That was Marek Schejbal from Green Seed Group International Food Consultancy. For more business stories, check out tvpworld.com and tvpworld_com on X. Thanks so much for joining us on Business Arena. I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us again at 5 p.m. CET tomorrow, and make sure you stay with us for Break the Fake.